Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month marks a new year, and then a new beginning for many of us, and also a new start. Maybe 2024 didn't go so well, or that you're just not feeling that life is how can I say the things that you want things to improve. And a lot of times I ask myself or people I work with, people I help in the mental health side is, am I allowed to get better? It's an interesting question because a lot of times it provides more questions that are maybe even deeper. A lot of times our biggest barriers are ourselves, the community. Asking for help or getting that help can be something that involves bravery. Sometimes it can be something that we don't even realize that is a barrier. Today, to talk to us deeper on this is a new guest. Her name is Dr. Carrie Johansson. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on this, being a part of the dialogue and sharing your insight.
It's great to be here. I'm really glad that you invited me.
Short disclaimer before we begin. If you're in the States, 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline. I like to encourage also, because I have listeners around the world, each month I try to showcase other countries and their suicide hotline. In South Korea, it's 02715-8600. In Sri Lanka, suicide hotline is 011-057-222-662. And in Sudan, suicide hotline is 249-1155-5253. Again, I always say, Carrie, that people say it better than me, so we're going to start there and see where this how this conversation goes. I really love the idea of having a safe space to talk about things that most people don't really want to talk about. It gets a little bit complicated. Sometimes it gets a little bit, but I think it's important because it's hard doesn't mean it's something we ignore, and that's part of the platform that we're trying to do here. I appreciate you being part of that. So
absolutely.
Brené Brown says it this way: asking for help is a power move. It's a sign of strength to ask, and a sign of strength to fight off judgment when other people raise their hands. What comes to mind when you hear this quote, and anything you want to share in regards to this or anything else?
I really appreciate Brené Brown because she has brought the concept of being vulnerable and being imperfect as something to just not stress about, right? It's something that is actually true for all of us. And I think she's challenging some of the notions that the self-help industry is propagating these days, which is that if you just think hard enough or try hard enough, you can have a problem-free life. And then when that doesn't happen, because life inevitably has ups and downs, positive, negative, and neutral input all the time, that doesn't mean that you failed. It actually means that this is life, and life gets lifey sometimes. And having the flexibility to, first of all, notice that things might not be going as well as you would like them to be, and then to actually say that out loud, which is also very different than being constantly in victim mode, right? Like everything is always wrong. It's always heavy. And so striking that balance between, the old pull yourself up by the bootstraps versus whole, like, my anxiety prevents me from doing anything at all. There's those two bookends. Neither one of them is healthy. And I think when we went from one bookend all the way to the other, we're making a mistake.
Yeah. I sometimes feel, working in the mental health field myself also are we mental health or mental maintain? Are we just maintaining what we have, or are we actually doing something to improve it? And I know that's kind of a play on words, but I like to think that it's mental health. I think that there's a component of health that we need to bring into it, as opposed to maintaining. Sometimes I feel we can get stuck in this idea that I don't want anything changed, and it's hard. And honestly, me experiencing mental health issues myself, and the medication management process, and sometimes that you're resistant to medications for so long, the parents are scared for any changes at all. I'd like to ask is, well, regarding this concept, is why do you feel it's been harder to ask for help today, from your experience?
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about that concept of mental health,
Mm.
but most of the time when people talk about mental health, what they're secretly talking about is someone's mental illness.
Mhm.
And so one of the terminology changes that I've started using is I like calling it mental fitness, because
Okay.
mental fitness is all about, just like regular fitness, it's going to need a regular practice repetitively. And I think
Mhm.
one of the reasons that sometimes folks have a hard time asking for help is that they feel like they're either doing nothing or they have to do all of these things. And again, like in between those two bookends is the answer. And also then figuring out what options you do have. I think sometimes it can be tricky to find a counselor, particularly in a price point that's affordable.
Mhm.
Or that your insurance takes. Therapy is all about fit. And so I would just encourage people to sort of shift that mentality from, either I have nothing or I have to do all of this work and it's going to be way too hard, to a, like if I'm doing small things every single day, that's actually going to be really helpful and effective. And then on
Mhm.
top of that is taking a look at what's a combination of things that is doable for you that you can start taking a look at, so that again, it should feel a little bit less hard and more doable. And you do that by breaking it down into smaller actions.
I was thinking recently. Sometimes I get my father he likes journaling, so I got him a journal, and I said the greatest journal. And I kind of laugh about it because I'm like, I just want to get a journal line that says the second greatest journal, because it can't be always the best journal, you know. So,
Yes.
and I feel what you're describing reminds me of that. And sometimes something that gets lost, as sure you know, is the ability to think that you have, those extremes, like you said, like I have a choice to be
Yeah.
moderately successful. Like, what
Yeah.
is wrong with that? So the interesting thing is there's always this push either, and it's funny because in the beginning, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, is mom brings them in. I'll just give you a scenario, obviously just
Yep.
made up, but mom brings them in and is like, see this person, he or she's not doing yada yada, and I usually say you need to leave, and I talk to the client, and then later on, if the client gives me permission, I talk to the mom, and I would say, hey, you're right, but it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked.
Right.
I want the person to feel that they can always come back. And the interesting
Yeah.
thing is that then they get there, but later on in that, crisis mode, things get stabilized, then they don't want anything to change. Nothing to change. The client
Yeah.
wants to do something. Go to school. Oh, it might be too much. Oh, I wants to try part-time job. Oh, it's too much. And it's interesting what
Well,
I see.
we
Go ahead.
currently have quite a cultural narrative that if you're uncomfortable, that it means that something's wrong and that you should stop and not do anything, right?
Yeah.
And you should only continue to proceed once you feel comfortable again.
Yeah.
But here's the tricky thing. We're going to feel uncomfortable a lot, and it's actually just fine. And so increasing our tolerance for feeling uncomfortable and then working through the discomfort is going to be really, really helpful. And a piece of how you do that is that you don't wait until you feel perfectly wonderful before you start something, particularly starting something new. Confidence, motivation, expertise, all of that comes after you've gone on a learning curve. But we're often waiting all the way down here and we're like, well, I can't start until I feel great. Well, you're actually going to start feeling great after you've moved the needle in terms of action. So thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, they're like a little triangle, right? But we have this idea that if we think hard enough, then we're going to feel better and then we'll go do something. But that's actually, the triangle is flipped upside down. When you go do something, and certainly think about what you're doing, right? Like, you want to figure out what your next best move is, not like your next worst move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so figure out what your next best move is and make it small, make it actually doable. And then notice that your feelings are going to shift. Your thoughts will shift as well. And then again, when you end up kind of mired in an emotion that isn't maybe your favorite, the question isn't, how can I feel better? I have to feel better. It's this insistence. Instead, the question is, oh, first of all, it's noticing, right? I notice I feel really lousy. Okay. What can I do right now? Right. And the answer isn't become a millionaire, meet Mr. Right, meet the perfect girl, get the A's, whatever the metric of success is. It isn't necessarily that outcome. The answer is not actually the outcome. The answer is, what's the next small step I can take towards the outcome that I want? And all of those small steps is how you get to the outcome. Yeah. We don't teleport directly to the outcome. I don't know about you, but I don't know how to teleport yet.
And I feel like, I guess I can only speak for myself, that we miss out when we don't embrace the process.
Yes.
So I use this analogy, like if I was a basketball player in high school, very all-state, going to college, want to really do well, but then you get to the NBA and you're just not where you want to be, and then you keep hitting that wall because they're exceptional players. But the thing is, the sad story in this illustration is the person loved basketball. They loved it until it became everything about what the person needed to get to be successful in basketball, as opposed to just liking that they have an opportunity to play basketball. And I feel that that's kind of like, I feel there's too much of a rush to get to these monumental steps, and I feel you miss out on the in-between and the growth and everything else. So that's at least from my experience. And a lot of times when you're describing, they say if you want to start a good habit, like go to the gym or start walking and just being active, you don't go when you're feeling the best. You go when you feel the worst. That's when it really is consistency in anything. And like I said, you're not going to be the greatest notebook. You may be the second greatest, maybe the third greatest. But I just feel if we allow ourselves to be human, I think that's what gets ripped apart somehow. Clients who are suffering from mental illness, that they're just either or. They're still human. They can make mistakes. They can have a fulfilling life. They can find direction. They can have purpose and everything else.
Well, and I think, this is one of the things my husband always says, is he's like, don't compare your insides, your complex insides, to people's polished outsides that they post on social media, right? And, it's an old expression about the overnight success only took 15 years, right?
Yeah.
But you only see the overnight success. Yeah. And so this notion, right, that you're somehow a failure because you're not at that outcome, at that perfect thing, at that success. How you get there is actually lots and lots and lots of small behaviors repeated over time. So let's get your small behaviors up and running in a way that moves you closer towards the type of life that you want, because I'm all for having the type of life that I want, and I want you to have the type of life that you want. And so let's talk about what that would look like. And to use a basketball analogy, years ago, I was working residential treatment, and one of my kids came in and was talking about how much they wanted to be a basketball player. And I said, where's your basketball? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm in a therapy session. And I said, you should be annoying me right now with dribbling your basketball, right? Like, where's your basketball? He's like, oh, well, I'll practice, I don't know. And this is a kid who wanted to be a professional basketball player and didn't even own a basketball. And so it was like, I'm all down to help you become a professional basketball player. And we're going to have to look at reality, right? Like, are you going to be tall enough and all that stuff? But let's start basically by, if you really want, like, if this is really important to you, I will help you do that. And the first thing we're going to do is get you a basketball. And then I want you to be practicing every single day with that basketball. I want to be the person who's saying, oh my gosh, you got to come in. Yes, you're going to have to put the basketball down.
Yeah.
But it was a really interesting conversation because the kid wanted the outcome and he was so enchanted with the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't doing any of the process.
Uh-huh.
And the invitation is, let's please set your goal, set your outcome, but let's get back to that process.
Yeah. I think so. When, like I said before, we miss out a lot when we don't embrace the process. And one of my friends once said that our lives are always unfinished, and it's kind of nice. Always unfinished. So if we're allowed to be okay with the unfinished, we may be able to be a little bit forgiving. Francis de Sales says, having patience with all things, but first of all with yourself, especially when it comes to these. These are complex things, and a lot of times, and I can imagine you experience person's been struggling with mental health or substance or dual diagnosis for several years, and obviously understanding and not minimizing what they're going through. But these things, like you said, these little steps, they may seem small, but as you get somewhere, but you may not see it. It's like if I go in another country, I'm kind of scared to speak Spanish. I understand a lot of Spanish, but I'm scared. So if I go to another country and I fumble with how I say things, but eventually it will get better, but I won't even know it is. So I'll come back. I'm like, I'm horrible at Spanish, but I'm speaking better. But you don't see it as a person who's actually speaking, if that makes sense. So.
And I think it also starts with, a lot of the folks that I know, either who are struggling with anxiety or depression or other mental health issues, they are so unkind to and about themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I like this quote a lot. First of all, with yourself, like you've got to start with a little bit of kindness to yourself. You are the only one, right? Like your life belongs to you. What do you want it to look like? And do you want it to look as critical and unkind as you're currently being to yourself? Probably not.
Yeah. And I would dare to say sometimes that's where in the beginning we could be our own biggest barrier when it comes to moving forward. I'm not minimizing what people may have experienced, whatever severe mental illness they may have, but am I allowed to get better? I say that because it's weird to say. It's a weird thing to say because sometimes people get a little offended. I'm like, of course I'm allowed to get better, but are you allowed to say no to things? Are you allowed to say yes to things?
And are you willing to look at the cost, right? Emotional, physical, social. Are you willing to look at the cost of getting better?
Yeah.
And sometimes that cost is substantial. I was at a party over Christmas and someone was newly sober and they were talking about like, who do I hang out with now? Right? Like the social cost of it was really big. Yeah. And once established and all of that, I think that social cost is really going to minimize. But what's the cost of getting better? And it's okay to acknowledge that there's going to be costs and benefits to getting better.
Yeah. There's healthy stress. I want to say that because, people, when we associate stress, it's always kind of very negative, but I think stress can be a good motivator if it's not handled in a way that disrupts your self-care, your everyday, disrupts what you're doing. But like I would say, when I got married, that was healthy stress.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. And when people those major life events, I think it's not necessarily bad. It's how we approach them. If I want to run the marathon, and I know it's going to be hard. And I feel in the physical illustration, it's so much easier to explain. Yep. But sometimes when it comes to mental health and just the concept that I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to do even anything when you're really. It seems like but just doing one thing could be a victory. And if you don't have kindness to yourself, you're never going to really feel you're getting anywhere if you
Yeah.
don't give you that that patience. In
So
regards to self, no, sorry, go ahead.
years ago, there was a stress scale. I'm not remembering the authors right now, but there was a stress scale, and I think it rated everything like the 100 top most stressful things. But it was
Mm-hmm.
interesting because in the top 10
Mm-hmm.
were a combination of things that you would think would be very positive, and a combination of things that you would think would be negative. So marriage was up there, divorce was up there, getting your dream job was up there, getting fired was up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having a child, losing a child, they're all up there. And so it was really an interesting examination of stress. Challenge and stress can be both linked with things that you do want, and it can be linked with things that you don't want, but both bring some level of challenge, and that's worth paying attention to.
And I would also mention, there's a concern of the external validation that may be guiding our lives.
Mhm.
In the essence, just even the milestone with the basketball, I need to reach this for me to feel that I'm a successful basketball
Yeah.
player. It's external, it's not internal. And
Mhm.
sometimes when that happens, you tend to kind of live a lot of other people's lives, versions of your lives that they
Yep.
want for you. And I like this British proverb, it makes me laugh. Too many cooks spoil the broth. I feel
Yep.
you see this in many ways. Mental health is complicated. I kind of like to think of when I was in trigonometry and going to the derivative of things. That's usually the real point of why they're there. A lot of times clients will be upset because the mom, or they spend a lot of time, I don't know if you experience it, of trying to explain what they're going through, and they're always 99.9% disappointed of the reaction or response from family members, or
Yeah.
because they take so much time on this. However, when I do feel that they sometimes this concept can be really hard for them to move past, because they're like, well, they don't think they have an option because they're so sick and such a burden, all these kind of very
Mhm.
negative viewpoints
Yeah.
to say my opinion, what I feel is as valid as anyone else, in the that kind of thing. So I do feel that sometimes this can, at least I've experienced myself, I've seen it working with people, that can be a barrier when it comes to being brave enough to say, I want to try this, I want
Yeah.
to try to be better in this, I want to and I think it's harder when when the mental health, the onset was very fast and hard, when the person was
Yeah.
Baker acted several times. A lot of if legal things happen surrounding it, even gets more
Yep.
complicated. So there's that. So without I want to ask you, and um, what we're talking. I mentioned briefly about barriers, but what ways
Mhm.
have you seen or experienced that have assisted in addressing barriers? Because I think a lot of times some of the, either they have a porous boundaries or they have rigid boundaries, and it doesn't really bode well in them at least getting to where they want to go, if that
Mhm.
gets, or not get distracted, or in that regards.
So one of the things that I talk a lot about is the concept of psychological flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a fancy term, but it's actually a really simple concept, which it means that you're starting by taking a look at what reality is and
Mm-hmm.
accepting the reality you're in. Now, I did not say approve, right? I
Mm-hmm.
said accept. So an
Yeah.
accepting looks like, all right, I just got fired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, oh boy, right? This feels
Mm-hmm.
off. Or I didn't get the thing, or I did get the thing I didn't want, or, fill in the blank, right? So, and it can also be positive, but working with the reality that you do have instead of spending a ton of time and energy and judgment that you're not in the reality that you want. And
Yeah.
so, one of those internal barriers, right, is this notion that we should be somewhere else, than we are,
Yeah.
right? Or one of my current favorite things to help people with is help people resist insisting that someone else should be thinking or doing something else, right? Like,
Yeah.
my life belongs to me, your life belongs to you, and sort of to keep that separation is helpful. And we get into a ton of pain when we've decided that someone else should be behaving in a different way than we are, right? And or that we should be behaving in a different way than we are. And so if you can start with that notion of flexibility, which is where you slow down and you do an actual assessment of what is really going on. Is there anything that's going well? Is there anything that isn't going well? And what are the actual options on the board? Because particularly if you're struggling with mental illness, let's just pick depression. Depression will get so noisy in your head and tell you that you can't do this and you can't do that, or you're worthless, right? Like the negative self-talk is so loud in depression. And if you do this psychological flexibility practice, you take a look and you notice that that's what depression is telling you. You probably have more options than the terrible options that depression is offering you, right?
Yeah.
And so then if you can move towards one of those options, depression will have a tantrum, right? That negative voice will get very noisy. It's like a 2-year-old having a tantrum. But if you can actually move towards something that will help improve your reality, then that's where you have some power. So one of the first barriers to take a look at is like, what are the stories that you're telling yourself? What are the negative thoughts, negative emotions that are keeping you stuck? And in particular, what are the things that you're insisting on being true that aren't actually true, right? And notice that they're not actually true. Notice what actually is true. So doing an assessment instead of all of this critical judgment is one of the places that I would start with this question.
Yeah, and I when there's generational gaps, like considerable ones, and the grandparents or parents don't understand why their granddaughter or daughter is exhibiting this, we give them all this stuff. She was never this way. A lot of times it can be a painful journey, and I say this for the people like parents and grandparents, and more so for the clients, because they get upset. They're like, they should know that I'm suffering. Like, they should know that this is hard on me. But it's also hard on them. And I'll say it this way: you're not going to make them understand what you're going through. I mean, but they care about you, and they're trying to support you the way they can. So if we can, the reality is that they won't. As a lot of times, I find it really helpful when they realize that in the reality that they probably won't get the understanding or the response that they want. But the fact of the matter is, their family is there trying to help them the best they can. And so that kind of dissolves as a barrier, and then they can work on like, well, all these things are not. I realize that this is something that is the reality that I'm facing right now. What can I do? And a lot of times it's simply just a simple step could just be like, well, this shouldn't happen. I need to, well, let's apply for this. Let's try to get you back. I like what this one entrepreneur says, and I'll say this one, and I want to, then we're going to shift gears to get a little bit know about you and your story and what brought you to doing what you're doing, all that stuff. So there's one entrepreneur, I like what he said. Me and my wife want to buy a house, right? And it's about statements. He says, if I say I cannot buy this house, we cannot afford this house, it stops the conversation. But if I say, how can I buy this house? What steps can I take to buy this house? And then keep questioning, keep being curious. The thing is that happens is I get to find out a little bit more about myself. This is the process. And during the process, I can actually figure out even though I want the house. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that, it's a self-discovery. So I kind of, you gain more insight, but you also gain more, you feel like you're part of the process. You're part of that journey. You're part of that healing, that part of that, So with that being said, I'm sorry we kind of went all over the place, but I like to give my new guests returning guests an opportunity to tell what brought you to do what you do, and why do you why is it so yeah, just the floor is yours. I don't want to speak for you. Sorry.
Well, I am a psychologist. I am in private practice, specializing in treating anxiety and trauma. And I've been in business for a long time for myself. I've had my private practice for 23 years. And I have been helping people since I can remember, helping people, helping animals. I was the kid bringing home the bird with the broken wing. And I just was really committed and just felt called early to help people in the world. And especially, I'm a kind of sunny side up kind of person. Like I like to try and land sunny side up and help other people land sunny side up. And that does not mean at all that my life has been perfect, far from it. But that commitment that I have for myself to hold hope and to feel joyful and to move towards, the type of life that feels really meaningful. That's been important to me for a very long time. And so that is foundational in my work. And a few years ago, I got extremely excited about helping even more people at a time, because an individual therapy practice, while remarkable, is me sitting across from one other person at a time. And that's an incredibly special experience. But there's also so much cool psychological information that I wanted to get out to more people at a time. So I wrote a book called Self-Help on the Go. And it's kind of pushing back against that self-help industry, right? Like right now, I feel like our self-help industry, first of all, is either really romanticizing being broken, which I'm like, stop it. Or it's kind of insisting that you can get to utopia, which I'm also like, and stop that too, right?
Yeah.
So this notion of what can we do in the moment? How can we do small improvements and make life feel better for ourselves, for others, for the people that we care about? That's my mission these days. So
That's wonderful. And I always ask, like, what's success for so and so, whoever the name is. What is success for you? Because a lot of times it's dictated by everything that's out there, like you said. And I'm for me, when I was in college, when my roommates would say, Robert, you could talk to about anyone, and I'm like, whatever. But I feel like I can. I've been working in the mental health field for almost 4 years, and and I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. I like meeting where they are. I'm a sucker for one who's struggling, and for me, one thing I would say that my clients say is that I'm there. I'm persistent. I'm just there. So like I won't have all the answers, but the thing is, they know I'll be there on their side. So I do find a lot of value of not sugarcoating. I was a church leader too, so hence the name. So I understand the trickiness of going to a church and someone just maybe beat cancer, and the same pew down the line, someone lost someone from cancer a week ago. So it gets very complicated to navigate interpersonal situations. But I think I feel just because it's hard, and sometimes we have that notion, if it's hard we gotta stop. I feel it's more important. Like I feel just because it's hard is the reason that it needs to be addressed. So in that sense, I tend to I tend to commend people who are like-minded, or who are trying to help those who are maybe not have all the tools, but even if a little bit I could get them where they are, that's all that matters. And doesn't yep. So that's basically it. But I appreciate, and those who are listening, watching, the links to all that she shared will be in the notes. So I encourage you to check it out, and see about the self-help to go and everything else. I appreciate what you do, Dr.
Thanks.
Carrie.
And I'm really happy that you're taking a podcast to the masses, right? Like it's a great way to reach more people at a time. And and to give, I think holding hope is that's a central pillar of my work. And
Hmm.
so if I can hold hope for people until they can figure out how to hold it for themselves and create a more meaningful and enjoyable life, that's success.
Yeah, and I feel like I was thinking about this today. A lot of times when you hear the word revive, it's very religious undertones. For me, I when you revive something, it's dead. So it has to be something dead first. So I'm really trying to revive a platform where people can share hope.
Yep.
Period. So I want to kind of shift gears to something more macro. I read this. It's really about information because like we indirectly we're talking about there's a lot of information out there, almost too much
Mhm.
information. I'm
So
going to read this quote from Yuval Noah Harari. He says it this way: in the past, censorship worked by blocking the flow of information. In the 21st century, censorship works by flooding people with irrelevant information.
mhm.
In ancient times, having power meant to have access to data. It's supposed to be data. I misspoke. Today, having power means knowing what to ignore. I feel like this is more apparent right now, especially how there's so much information out there. You
Mhm.
could go WebMD, you could listen to your neighbors, but we relinquish our choice, relinquish everything to this concept of certainty. But it doesn't really get us anywhere. I just like this, I guess, um, insight, slight insight. I'm not saying it works for every single model, but I do feel that he's onto something in the idea of how we look at information today versus in the past.
And I
And
and I think it's a real mental challenge because we're currently getting bombarded by things on platforms that are purposefully designed to be addictive,
yeah,
right? So we really have to take charge over
mm-hmm,
what we're inputting and digesting, right? So the same way that you hopefully aren't living on junk food, right? And
mm-hmm,
expecting to feel really physically healthy. If we are living on the mental equivalent of junk, right? Which is being on
mm-hmm,
social all the time or listening to the news all the time, all of that
mm-hmm,
sort of stuff. It's important to curate your information and to also limit your exposure to just endless screens. Get
yeah,
outside, have real connections, touch,
mm-hmm,
like actually have quantifiable things that you are engaging with both physically and mentally, emotionally.
mm-hmm,
And we know for sure that we have decades of research on this, right?
mm-hmm,
Like one of the trifecta of things: sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
mm-hmm,
Attending to those three things helps improve your physical health and your mental health. Next
yeah,
step up, attend to your connections and do some meaningful work. And
mm-hmm,
so that, if you can take those 5 steps on a regular basis, throw in a
mm-hmm.
little sunshine and nature as, dessert, you will have the ingredients for a much more robust and healthy life, both mentally and physically.
It's just more well-rounded. It's a more
Yep.
well-rounded approach. Obviously, everyone's needs and will be slightly different, but I do feel getting outside, not looking like I kind of I have a phone and it's not I it's kind of I joke at work. I'm like it's a stapler. I barely look at like I have it. I I I
This is
I
wonderful, by the way.
huh? What's that?
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's just I don't. For me, I whenever I'm on screen, I'm very creative. So like I know when I like music. I like writing. I like these things that come back from work. Maybe it's a hard day. I will dive into video editing or audio or any of this stuff because those are things that are cathartic. But I also know, as hyper intuitive, hyper focused I could be, it doesn't replace sleep. So I also
Right.
know that I have this kind of balance, and also being in communities. Work is great, and I love my work, but also other communities. The one thing about I try to embrace myself is positive communities. A lot of
Mhm.
times, if you're not feeling, I kind of feel it's odd to think, especially someone who experienced abuse or domestic abuse or anything of that nature, they may not want to grow connections, like a friend or anything, but
Yeah.
they may want to be around communities that are positive.
Yep.
Just to start off. So for me, I find that helpful. Me being faith-based, yeah, church community is helpful. Is it but it's not everything. For me, it's people finding activities. There's a trail that me and my wife go walk on. It was one of the most wonderful things during COVID. 'Cause it was, for me, it was our little escape that we could go
Yep.
in the trail. It was just being out, but also taking account. If I, being honest with myself. Oh, I feel a little dragging. What's going on?
Right.
Those kind
Noticing.
of things. Noticing.
Starting with that noticing, right? And then
Mhm.
making little adjustments. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to ask you as we kind of wrap things up, but I really appreciate you coming on. Is when you think of this month's thing, obviously, each month I try to, some months, year to year, I keep the same, but brave healing. What comes to mind? What does that mean to you today when you think about the word brave healing?
Well, I think that commitment to attending to taking care of yourself is an act of bravery, and then repeating it, right? So figuring out what are the things that are healing and soothing to you, and then how do you let yourself do that more than once, right? And again, doing that without all of the outrage and angst, right? Like, I'll be okay if you behave this way. That's not brave healing. That's actually kind of being a bully. We don't we don't want to be a bully. And secretly, that's what that is, right? And so brave healing, I think, looks like slowing down, doing that assessment. What's going well in my world? And where do I need to improve? And what would that take for me to do it? And that I think is true bravery. Yeah.
I remember you mentioning vulnerability. I feel that's brave healing. Being vulnerable, being willing to be vulnerable. As adults, the hardest thing for us to say sometimes, I need help.
Yeah.
Just those 3 words.
Yeah.
And another thing about brave healing, I feel, is be kind, not nice.
Yes. Two very different things, right? And kindness, again, like we talked about earlier, kindness starts with being kind to yourself.
Yeah. Right? I think there's a problem with nice is it's just because it's so ambiguous what it means. When I'm a kid, my mom tells me to be nice and be less disruptive. Don't make this harder for myself. Being kind there's no transaction. It's like I'm being kind for this person. So it's not I'm trying to be kind so I avoid confrontation. I'm being kind because I'm being kind. So
kindness is value, right?
Yeah.
Like kindness, I think of as a foundational value.
And when I think about self-respect, in regards to self-care, value, one thing that we may overlook is time. We can't make up more time. We can't make up the time we have. But if we value our time, I think M. Scott Peck says it this way. He says, until you value yourself, you won't value your time. Until you value your time, you will not do anything with it. So sometimes we try to solve the problems that we are facing with the same verbiage or mindset that caused them. And so it's understand slowing down. I really feel that's something that I've learned the last 3 years, that I do my best work when I slow down. And I actually time myself on certain things because it feels like it's going I'm taking too long, and it's really not that long. I had to kind of condition myself because I working in this field. It's like all the documentation I'm not used to. I'm like this is taking forever, and I literally slowed down. I did a timer several times, and I realized it wasn't that long. It allowed me to get better at what I do, but it also allowed me to have peace of mind. And I think that kind of helped me in the morning. So in the morning when I make my tea, I take my time making each step of my tea. I have this kind of process, and that helps me. And then final thoughts. Again, it was great to have you, Dr. Carrie Johansson. Any final
Yeah,
thoughts you want to mention?
this is just a lovely conversation, but I think sort of the summary is that you have more agency than you're giving yourself credit for. And if you can slow down and notice, right, and do that assessment, then options kind of open up in front of you. And those, again, those small steps, you can repeat them, you can do them, and that should help, hopefully help you feel like you're moving forward. And that is a really great feeling. And that sort of starts a positive upward spiral, which is really nice.
I just want to say thank you for your time and coming on and sharing your insight. It was wonderful to have you.
It was
Dr.
great to
Carrie.
be here. Thanks so much.
Just remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries to ReviveMinistriesFL.com. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast, leaving with this last, actually, proverb. It's a Korean proverb. The water downstream is clean only when the water upstream